Real quick. All right, folks. Thank you, everybody, for coming out to our budget town hall today. It's always a pleasure to be in Ward F. It's a pleasure to be back at the Bethune Center. I want to start off by thanking some of the dignitaries in the room. Thank you to Councilman Gilmore for being here. Let's give Councilman Gilmore a round of applause. Our Deputy Mayor, Dia Bryant. Thank you, Dia. Our Business Administrator, Peter Horton. And we have the acting public safety director, or acting deputy public safety director, Lauren Hart. And of course, Mayor Solomon. So thank you everybody for coming out today. My name's Stu Thomas. I am a senior advisor in the mayor's office. I'm looking forward to a productive conversation with the community. And first, just wanted to thank you all for being engaged in your community. This is really important, and we want to, as a new administration, be always leading with the community's feedback in mind. We want to hear directly from you tonight because we're all in this together, and we're going to be navigating the city's budget challenges together, and really want the solutions to be of, by, and for the community. So just to give a brief explanation of what you're going to be hearing tonight. Tonight, we're going to be walking through the city's budget situation and hearing from residents. The presentation is going to start with a short overview of how property taxes work, how the city budget is structured broadly. We'll talk a little bit about the city's current financial struggles, the situation, and how the gap developed. After that, we'll address and outline the principles guiding how our administration plans to address those challenges. We'll share some of the priorities that have come out of meetings with community leaders, especially leaders here in Ward F. And then we'll talk a little bit about the steps the city is already taking, potential future ideas that we can be taking for reducing costs and generating revenue. And then finally, the most importantly, we want to hear from you. So we'll spend some time taking your questions, hearing some feedback, hearing some ideas. Just to set some ground rules for the Q&A portion. One, you'll have 1 minute to ask your questions. We want to give everybody here in the room a chance to speak. Everybody's taken time out of their Thursday evening to ask questions, to engage in the civic process, and we want to be respectful to our neighbors and giving them time to speak. We will be taking questions starting from the front row and then going to the back row. So as you're listening to the conversation tonight, I really encourage you all to write down your question and have your question kind of pre-written before you go to ask it. I find that makes for a more respectful dialogue and makes it for kind of a clear question asking experience for everybody. And then if you don't get the chance to speak, or if you're like some of our neighbors who don't want to talk up in front of a town hall but do want to be heard, we're going to have a link, a QR code at the end of our presentation that we'll have tonight where you can submit your feedback, or if you have other thoughts that come up after this meeting, ways that we can navigate our budget challenges together, creative solutions. We want to hear from those. And just to read that out now, that's jcnj.org/community meetings. Again, you'll hear me say this 100 times, so don't rush to write it down. But again, it's jcnj.org/community meetings, where you can submit all of your feedback, creative ideas. We really want to hear from you. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it off to our business administrator, Peter Horton, to start the presentation. Oh, I'll kick it off, excuse me, to Mayor Solomon to give us some words of welcome.
All right, thank you, Stu. Just flag a couple things just for everybody. So first, feel free to get up at any point. We have some coffee and water in the back. So if you're, don't hesitate to get up mid-presentation and get some refreshments. And then Councilman Gilmore and his Chief of Staff, Erica Walker, have the Everything Ward F table there with really important community resources. So make sure you check that table out either during the presentation or afterward before you leave. Want to just basically give you a quick 5-minute overview of I think a couple of really important points and go from there. First, obviously, thank you all for taking your time, whether you're here or you're watching virtually. You're taking time out of your Thursday evening to think about the future of your city, to think about what we need to do to solve this significant budget crisis that we face. And I'm very appreciative of that. Second thing is, Peter will go through in a little bit more depth the numbers, and he'll be able to go through how we got there. But the very simple version of that is, the prior administration, basically dug a hole, and then they, instead of fixing it, they kept digging, which is always the wrong thing to do. And that looked like, our financial situation started to get worse. They spent all this money, all of our COVID aid. And at some point they had to have a reckoning and say, well, look, this isn't sustainable. We either have to increase property taxes, or we have to decrease services, or we have to find a third solution, go to the state and ask for help. We have to do something. But instead of reckoning with that, they said, let me just keep kicking the can down the road the next year and the next year. And then that got us to here. And what you'll see for the budget is so much of it was plugged with these one-time gimmicks, selling land, using cash reserves, all of these types of things that don't solve the problem, but that kick the can down the road. Now, as we tackle this, when Peter will talk about our values, our core commitment is to end that. We have to get ourselves back to fiscal stability. I could theoretically try to patch over a budget this year, but then I have the same problem next year. And it's just worse year after year after year. To do that and to reset everything, we thought it was so important to be connected to our community through this process. I just want to thank Senator Angela McKnight for coming and joining us. Thank you, Senator. So you had to listen. We've done, this is going to be the fifth town hall meeting. It's going to be, we had 6 prior smaller community gatherings. So it's our 11th meeting with the community talking about this. And every single time I've had one of these meetings, I found the conversation really insightful. The people sharing ideas with me, people just telling me what's on their mind. And like, what is it that we can't touch? That just, people have said, rec is so important in Jersey City and it's already underfunded. So that we can't look at cutting our rec services. Those are the thoughts that are really important for me to hear. Ideas, right? Let's go after landlords who are abusing their tenants and find revenue through that process. So we want to hear every idea that's on your mind. Now, the biggest way we're trying to get support is by working with the state. And we've met with the governor, we've met with the leaders of the legislature, the assembly, and the Senate. And I always say there are 3 key points that I make when I meet with these, state leaders. The first point I make is that Jersey City's economic growth has actually benefited the finances of the state more than it's benefited the finances of Jersey City. That as we've developed and as new buildings have been built, the state has gotten, we actually finally have the numbers on this. So annually, the state gets $400 million more in tax revenue from Jersey City than it would have if we hadn't grown. Thank you guys. Welcome. Come on in. So that's on an annual basis, that's $400 million of revenue we send to the state, right? That they get to use for their, all their budget issues. And if we stop growing and developing and all those things, it actually makes the state budget crisis much worse. So we're saying your aid to Jersey City isn't, a handout. It's actually an investment in your budget too, because if we stop building, your budget problems get worse year after year after year. And so first thing. Second thing I say is folks in Jersey City, well, actually, let me phrase this one first, is people look at the waterfront and they think Jersey City is a wealthy city. And we say, yes, we've had a lot of wealth move into the city, but we are still a middle and working class city. That if you go beyond the high rises and some of the brownstones, you find a city where the median income is still lower than the states, where we have a poverty rate that's close to 20%, where nearly 2/3 of all our students in public school are considered economically disadvantaged, right? That's the reality of Jersey City. And so, you might look at the high rises and think the city is one thing, but it's not. And then the last piece, which connects to that piece, is folks in Jersey City are already stretched thin. Our property taxes have gone up 50% in 5 years. That's mostly due to the school funding issues, right? The state cut our school budget. Our school district increased taxes to address that. So from my perspective, I say, look, you have to keep in mind each of those 3 things. And then I add a final point. And I say, we're not asking for aid for 5 more years. We're asking for it. If you give us what we need this year, we'll get back on our feet. If you stretch it over 2 years, or stretch it over 2 years, but we're not asking you to do this for 5 years, right? If you can give us what we need now, we can get back to recovery. And that will mean tough choices. And Peter will talk about that. I'll say it up front, it's not a fun thing to say. People ask me, what does it mean for property taxes? We're doing everything we can to limit property tax increases, but I can't sit here and promise no increase. In fact, there's definitely going to be an increase, but we are trying to limit the amount as much as we can. It means that there are going to be tough choices in the city budget. There might be valuable programs we can't continue because we have to live within our means. But we're making those tough choices together, informed by what we're hearing in these meetings, informed by a real wonderful group of experts who are really going to help guide us. That combination of, are you community grounded and you're working with experts? I think that's the right way to approach these things and make sure that we have a path forward. So that was just a quick introduction. Peter's now going to give you the numbers. And then after he does the numbers, I'll come back up and we'll do open Q&A and answer everyone's questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. As the mayor stated, my name is Peter Horton. I'm the acting business administrator for the city, which means I'm the guy who helps run all the departments, run all the different divisions of the city, and helps put together the budget for the city. So I'm going to go over quickly just what the budget is, kind of how we got here, and kind of give you an in-depth analysis of where we are currently with the city and why we're asking for the aid that we're asking for. I do apologize. I have an 8-month-old and she loves to share her germs with me. So I'm getting over a cold right now. So I apologize for being a little nasally for everything. But before we start, we're going to go to the first slide. And what's really important is to kind of go over the breakdown of your taxes and understand visually where this started, how your taxes are divided, and what this means to you individually from a budgetary perspective. And if you look at it, you'll see going back to 2018, you had a pretty even breakdown between the city's portion, the Board of Ed's portion, and the county's portion. Those are the three entities that you pay taxes for. You pay them in one bill. When you pay that tax, you're really paying three separate entities. And you'll notice around 2020, when COVID was kind of in full swing, everything was happening, there is a somewhat evenest breakdown between your taxes. Jersey City is about 44% of your municipal taxes for your entire tax budget. Your Board of Ed is about 27%, and your county was about 28%. And what happened is, as the Board of Ed slowly, shot up, or so I didn't say slowly, it was shot up, your taxes for the municipal portion stayed about the same, if not went down. And how that happened was the city, as the mayor mentioned, started to do a lot of one-time gimmicks and offsets. They were trying to keep your portion artificially low to try to offset what's happening at the Board of Ed, right? And what happened to the Board of Ed was the funding from the state. They changed what's called the S2 formula, and it's a funding how the state provides money to the Board of Ed and to the schools locally, right? So you'll notice that in 2025, when you look at it, Jersey City stayed roughly the same from 2021, about 36% to the 33%, but your Board of Ed portion shot up to 43%, all right? And what that means is, over that 5-year, 6-year period, the city did a lot of those gimmicks that I mentioned, those offsets, to keep your taxes artificially low, if not lower them, particularly in 2021, when they used COVID funds, which is a one-time fund the federal government gave us to drop your taxes to offset those Board of Eds. But because they kept your taxes artificially low without doing modest, sensical increases, you put yourself in a position where now you're in a hole, as the mayor said, you have to try to climb out of. And I'll show you what that looks like. So this is a breakdown, and you'll see if the paper, if you guys have it in front of you, of what the budget looks like in real time versus expenditures from the city and revenue from the city and how we get to that number, all right? So if you look at it, the first few, I think 4 or 5 slides are all non-discretionary obligated expenditure of the city, right? There are things like salary and wages for public safety, other salaries for the rest of the city, their health insurance expenditures, pension expenditures. Those are things that the city does not have any discretion over. They are obligated by law to pay those, all right? And all of those together make about 80% of your budget. So before we even get into talking cuts and how we can reduce, our expenditures and try to balance the budget, it's important to understand that 80% is pretty much fixed across the board, all right? And of that 80%, you'll see that public safety alone is $218 million. Even if we try to cut a lot of these departments, that alone would not make up that gap that we have of $254 million, right? And we balance those expenditures with the line below it, which is the revenue, right? The first and largest portion, I'm sure you're all aware of, is property taxes. That is the majority of how the city pays for salary, wages, and all the services that you receive. Beyond that, you have things like, your library levies, your, other offsets, other revenue sources that the city have. And those other revenue sources are only about $50 million. So even if we double those, and those other revenues might be parking tickets, licenses, fees, all the kind of stuff that, people have to pay on a discretionary basis, is only about $50 million. So even the city aggressively use those measures, double those measures, it's still not enough with offsets to close that gap of $254 million. So if you can go to the next slide. This slide is important because it kind of shows you, based on sustainable revenue and city expenditures, where they've aligned over the years, right? So the top line, the blue line, that is the expenditures of the city over the past few years, right? Below that, the red line is your sustainable revenue. That's revenue based on things I just said about property taxes, fees, all those kind of collections, all right? And the gap in between them is the one-shot deals, the offsets that the city has used over the past few years to close that gap between sustainable revenue and city expenditures, right? And you'll notice in 2021, the biggest gap, that's the year that I mentioned earlier, where the city used the federal COVID funding to offset the gap between revenue and expenditure from the city. But beyond that time period, a little before, but definitely beyond that time period, there's always been that substantial gap between what the city's spending and what the city's bringing in on a sustainable annual basis. And how they've merged that gap is by those one-shot deals of land sales, pushing off expenditures the next year, bonding for certain expenditures, using those kind of gimmicks, as the mayor would call them, to really make up the difference in between what we can bring in and what we're expending as a city. The next one. What does that mean for us? All right. This slide kind of highlights what that means budgetarily. All right. The city relies on sustainable revenue to fulfill our services, pay our wages, pay all those obligations and non-discretionary items that I mentioned earlier. Right. The city, using those one-shot deals, has done over about $168 million to a tune of 22%. Right. To fill the gap between our budget, which is roughly $750 million in 2025, to what the obligations were based on that budget. All right. And if you look compared to other cities, Newark, Hoboken, Bayonne, were double, if not quadruple, similar situated cities. So doing that has a real impact on you, especially doing it year after year after year, because that hole, as the mayor described, gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and eventually requires somewhere to make up that difference. There's only so much land you have. There's only so much you can bond for. And when that bill comes due, it's unfortunately getting made up through the budget and through the revenue from the city with tax increases and other items. Next one. This is a very detailed slide. I know it can be a little confusing, so I'm going to try to break it down in pieces to make it a little bit easier to visualize. And what this is basically a snapshot of 2025 to 2026 with particular budget lines that detail why this difference from last year to this year equals $254 million, right? Essentially, where do we get that number and how does that number translate to what the city is going to owe for its budget and for its expenses going forward, right? And the first part is, you'll notice in 2025, there's a lot of blank spaces and a lot of dashes, all right? That represents things that were not budgeted for last year, things that may have been deferred, that might have been passed on. And those are the things that, we mentioned as gimmicks, where it's an obligation the city has to spend, but they found ways not to spend it. Those could be things like they've borrowed to pay for retirement expenditures, right? Every year the city owes money for retirement, whether it be city employees, police, fire, et cetera, they have to pay for it. What they can do and what the state is allowed you to do in extreme circumstances is to borrow or bond for that and defer that cost over a series of years. What the city has done is year after year is continue to do that versus doing it in extreme measures and never budgeted for that. So if in 2025, you'll notice that was blank, right? So if you look at the comp retirement payments, nothing in 2025, but in 2026, which is what we know we owe, it's predictable, it's $11 million. And whether we pay that, it's the operating budget or through bond, we're obligated to pay it no matter what. Same thing on the reserves, all right? Reserves are various things like, we know we have tax appeals. We know we have obligation that the city's going to have to pay. Things that we can, again, predict. Settlements for lawsuits, all that kind of stuff. Historically, the city would not budget for that. They knew it was coming. They knew they'd have to spend money on it. They could predict how much they'd have to spend roughly, but they wouldn't budget for it, instead opting to bond for it so they can kick it down to the next year. Now, again, as the mayor kind of alluded to, that's a detriment to the taxpayer because when you bond for it, you have to pay interest. So not only are you paying your obligation, you're paying additional money on top of that over a series of years, right? We also have things like the health insurance, all right? You'll notice in 2025, it was $147 million. And in 2026, $195 million. Healthcare has astronomically increased, but not that much, all right? That was a situation where the previous administration knew what the expenditures would be and purposely budgeted underneath those, hoping that they could kick it on to the next year and try to make up the difference in the following year, right? So that in itself is about a $50 million difference, okay? Then you also have things like your deferred charges, your tax appeal settlement that I mentioned. All those are items that the city, again, knew it were coming, knew they could budget for, did not have a reserve for, and because they didn't budget for it, it kicks the can down to the next year, and unfortunately, the next administration, right? When you total all those lines up, you get to about $186 million difference. That means from 2025 to 2026, there's $186 additional million the city had to come up with to pay for obligations that they're legally required to spend. Then on the second line, we'll call it the second bucket, it's your revenue items. Those are items that the city receives revenue for, and we can use to offset some of those, right? However, what was a detriment to us is that those revenues didn't equal or less than what they would be in this year, 2026. So for instance, in the pilot payments, last year we received about $93 million. This year, we only project to have about $81 million, right? About over a $10 million difference that we are not receiving in, this year that we have to make up for in our budget. You also have things like these accounting tricks where they would move money around between accounts to look like it was making money, but in reality, the money was never there, all right? You had things like your state properties, you have your cash reserves, and all of those are revenues that we should have seen or could have seen this year, but didn't, and add up, all right? When you combine the top line, which is money that we have to budget for, but the city never budgeted for, and the decrease in revenue from the second line, you equal together $275 million. So that's the number that we would have owed collectively for 2026. Now that number was thankfully reduced a little bit, but nowhere near where it needs to be. And that reduction comes in that very small line at the bottom, which is things that kind of worked in our favor. Things like our ratables. So ratables are when you have properties in the city, we have a lot of development in the city, as you guys are all aware of. We get tax increases based on those. We get a higher proportion based on the properties and the amount of value we add to the city. Those went up to the tune of $13 million. All right. There are also some deferred charges, some other revenues that we realized, but in total, that number is only about $20 million. So we take the 275, which is again expenditures that we have to pay that was never paid historically, decreases in revenue that we're not going to be receiving this year, and we offset that by whatever additional revenue we would have had based on the 25 to 26 budget. And that's where you go from the 275 to the $254 million that we now have to pay, or that everyone has to pay in this room for the future years. Next slide. All right. And this brings us to our historic budget deficits. So what this slide is basically showing you is that we're looking at what our deficit, meaning the money that we owe, compared to what our entire budget is for 2026. And we're comparing that with other cities in New Jersey and around the country, and what historically they've had to deal with for their budgets. And you'll notice ours is 28%, right? And when you look at like municipalities like Atlantic City, when you look at Detroit, New York City, Buffalo, we're substantially higher than most of those cities. And we're unique too, because as most of you notice, that the city itself seems to be flourishing. New development's going up. There's a lot of new construction, new restaurants, new businesses. However, we're still struggling budgetarily, right? And what that shows you that in other cities like Atlantic City, Detroit, those have historically happened when there's a collapse in the economy. In Atlantic City back in, I think it was 2015, they had the entire casino market collapse, and that's what created their deficit, right? Detroit, Michigan, you had the collapse of the auto industry and those entities. That's what led to their deficits. Jersey City is unique because, economically, we're thriving at a private level, but at a public level, we have a giant deficit and budget deficit we have to make up for. Next slide. What does that mean for you, and how are we going to go forward with it? So we've done community meetings all over the city. The mayor is being very transparent with it. And it's important because you can see a lot of the things that happened historically and that led us to there is because of lack of transparency about, gimmicks, one-shot deals, things to try to offset stuff that you guys would never understand or be able to catch on a normal basis unless you're looking for them. And the mayor wants to be as transparent as possible what he's doing, so you understand that he's trying to fix this for a long-term basis and at a sustainable basis. And how we've done that is through these community meetings. We've met with the public, we've met with the residents to get feedback from you about what you think your priorities are. So when we look at the budget, we know what we should be focusing on as far as sustaining certain services, not decreasing revenue from certain areas or expenditure from certain areas, and making sure we're trying to provide the best city to you, but at the same time, the most affordable city to you. And that means things like, we have to recognize first that we're in a budget crisis and be honest about it, right? And we have to lead by example. Right? We have to do things like making those hard decisions. What are we going to cut? What services can we do out with? Okay. We also have to be transparent and clear with where we are. We want to communicate to you what we're doing real time as effectively as possible so the residents know what to expect so they can plan accordingly as well. And we also want to minimize the impact on the working man. All right. As you saw from one of the first slides or second slides, a lot of our budget is based on salaries and wages. Right. salaries and wages of hardworking union labor, residents that, work for the city, people that are just trying to make a difference in the city and provide youth services, and we're at no fault to what the situation that we're in currently, right? We also want to remove inefficiency and corruption in government, right? As you can see, part of the reason why we got here was, tricks, gimmicks, hiding what we were doing. We want to remove that so we can be more efficient and be more transparent with our budget process. Also, that means holding developers and other people accountable. To our earlier point, we are thriving economically as a private sector, but that's hurting all parts of the city. We make sure that everyone that's thriving is paying their fair share to the city and making sure they're supporting the city as best they can with everyone else. We also want to put the city back on solid financial footing going forward. And that means removing those gimmicks, those one-time expenditures, and moving to more of a sustainable model where the revenue that comes in will match our expenditures going out. Next slide. So these are the priorities that we've learned from the community meetings like this, where we've talked to community leaders, we've talked to residents and got their feedback as far as what their priorities are and where we should focus as we look to making changes in the budget, right? Obviously, number one, and I think the most important one that's going to guide us is affordability. The city's, as no fault to you and the residents, has gone up astronomically. Between the Board of Ed and all the other expenses that we had, the bills for everyone and taxes for everyone have gone up over 50% in the last 5 years. So trying to find a way to make this as affordable as possible and not hit the landowners and the renters and everyone else is a key priority of our budget process. We also want to ensure that we're keeping property taxes as stable, because that does affect both the renters and the property owners and business owners. We want to ensure that developers are paying their fair share. And a lot of that means is going after these pilots, right? The city historically has used pilots as a revenue source and as a development mechanism, which when used appropriately can be effective. But when it's not being properly overseen, not properly managed, can lead to a lot of corruption or lead to a lot of people not paying their fair share of everything. And the mayor did that almost day one with his executive order indicating he's going to audit all the pilots that we currently have to make sure that the residents are getting, the most revenues possible from those pilots and that they are paying their fair share. And we're going to continue to audit those year after year to make sure they're managed properly and that the revenue that they're paying is being adequately consumed by the city. We're also going to do things to protect essential services of the city and the quality of life of the city. As we make these tough decisions going forward, a lot of the residents have told us that, they rely on public safety. They rely on clean parks and that kind of stuff in order to have the quality of life that they want and the environment for their kids they want to raise and an environment for their families, right? To do that, it's going to mean some tough decisions on our part. But as we go through the budget process, we want to make sure that to the extent possible, we're not impacting services, which means, we can't promise we're not going to have to do anything when it comes to employment, but we're going to try to do as least as possible to affect the employees of the city. We're going to do as least as possible to affect the services that you receive from those employees and make sure that we can increase where we need to find areas of the city with the already high taxes that you're paying to make sure we're bolstering those businesses up and give you the best quality from the services that you guys rely on. We're also going to make sure we do things like, as we said, traffic safety. Right, it's a big one. The mayor just did an initiative where he's done a motorcycle squad. He reintroduced the traffic division for the city, where he wants to focus on things that are going to affect your lives when it comes to driving, walking the streets, riding your bikes, all those issues. Right, and it's also going to be a benefit to the city because focusing on that also means revenue for the city. Right, everyone in here I know has seen cars parking wildly, driving wildly, behaving improperly. Enforcing that is going to improve the quality of life for the city, but it's also going to produce much needed revenue from the city that has long been ignored historically. Also doing things like sanitation, right? When we focus on how the sanitation is being delivered to the city, where that means cleaning the blocks for everyone, where that means the trash collection and how historically has not been enforced with inspectors or anyone watching over to make sure they're doing their job appropriately. The mayor's reintroducing all that to ensure we have proper oversight that will help generate revenue, but also improve the quality of services that every resident in the city is receiving. And we're also going to look at crossing guards, right? A lot of people have children in this room or have grandchildren. We want to ensure that they're getting to school safely, that they're walking the streets safely, and that they're being taken care of when they're out in the public. We're also going to look at things like youth programs. One of the mayor's big commitments is that, as it's a tough time for everyone, as people are paying a lot more in taxes, they don't feel like they're not being taken care of at the residential level, right? Children should have places to go in the summer, so they have activities to participate in. The mayor wants to ensure that as we look through the budget and look at ways to tighten certain areas and increase revenue in other areas, that we're not letting that impact the youth of the city, right? And lastly is open space, because again, that touches on the youth, it touches on all our lives. We want to make sure you guys have clean parks, adequate open space to participate in and utilize, because as things become tighter and tougher for all of us, it shouldn't impact you in that level. And you guys should have a spot where you can, enjoy and use the city and feel like your taxes are going to something, right? Brings us to our last slide, which is what we have done so far, right? As mentioned, the mayor has used his executive powers to issue executive orders to audit all pilots, right? It's a big priority of ours. We want to make sure that as a city grows, which we, rely on, from a local level and from a state level, that they're making sure they're paying their fair share of everything. We also changed the healthcare administrator, all right? So the city has their own private healthcare. We're self-insured. The city realized that we're paying too much for that healthcare, and the mayor, day one, changed our healthcare provider, but also found a provider that's going to provide the same services, if not better, than our last provider. So what that did was it saved all the taxpayers over $30 million per year going forward, and continue the same services that the city was receiving for their employees and their healthcare. He also is committed to having these town halls, right? Again, we want to be as open, as transparent as possible to everyone. The more dialogue we have, the better ideas we receive from the community. We find out what your priorities are. So when we do our budget process, we know where to look. And we also receive ideas about ways we can generate revenue or maybe cut expenditures. In a crisis like this, it takes a community, it takes a village to kind of pull everyone out of it. We also hired a financial advisor. This is a new one that we haven't used previously. That has a new perspective on the city. That was hired to combat the crisis that we're in now and look at ways to improve our financial situation in the city currently to have the best financial situation, best sustainable financial situation going forward over the next 5 years. And we've also aggressively pursued other avenues to close the budget gap. That means working with our state and county officials. We have the Honorable Senator Angela McKnight with us today. She's been great. We've been working with her team and all the teams around Hudson County to ensure that we are getting as much as we can from the state. As I mentioned earlier, the S2 and the school funding formula has hurt Jersey City taxpayers overall, not necessarily the municipal budget, but as your Board of Ed taxes go up, it doesn't mean the difference to you. You guys are still paying it regardless. So we're trying to work with our state partners, get as much money as possible from the state, whether it's through transitional aid or other funding sources, to kind of close the gap that we're currently facing at all levels, Board of Ed and municipal government. We're also working through evaluating opportunities to increase revenue. Those are things like looking at our fees that the city charges, looking at how we're enforcing different penalties, going back to our traffic unit. Are we getting as much money as possible for our parking lots, our parking spaces, our people that are driving poorly? Jersey City is a very big commuter town. We have a lot of people cutting through the city to go to the tunnel, to go to the New York City. Are we enforcing our laws and getting the appropriate revenue for that by making it a cleaner and safer city, but also generating the revenue on the back end? And then lastly, evaluating staff and resize where necessary, right? As I mentioned, the mayor's priority is ensuring services remain equal to or better than in almost all circumstances. However, we have to be realistic. If there are avenues that we have to cut, if there are services that are duplicative or unnecessary and more vanity services, we have to be realistic of what they are and reducing some of those in order to provide a more sustainable city for everyone, right? And that's why these meetings are important, because we're going to learn from you what areas are important to you. So when we go through the budget process, what areas we can start to detract from and reduce in order to provide a sustainable city budget. Last slide. And some of our more detailed revenue generating and cost reduction ideas, right? These are ideas that came from the community that we've sourced from individuals and things that we'd like to hear from you as well today. If there's other ideas you have that you think we should add to this list. Things like better parking enforcement, adding movie violations from the traffic unit, building code and other code violations, right? You've all had neighbors or family probably been affected by bad landlords, violations in buildings, things that aren't done properly. That's stuff that we can enforce and improve your quality of life, but also can enforce and make sure there's revenue coming to the city because of that. Payroll tax, right? The city a while ago instituted a payroll tax where we collect a portion of that tax from businesses to help bolster the school's budget. Because even though that money doesn't go to our budget through the city, by reducing their budget, it reduces how much you pay in taxes through your entire tax bill, right? Things like more efficiency in delivering services. Again, we established a new healthcare provider. It's a cheaper provider. It provides the same level of services, if not better. It's a cost savings to all taxpayers. The proper use of officers, right? The mayor announced this a few weeks ago through his public safety director that they're ending fixed posts throughout the city, primarily in Greenville on the south side of the city. That's an area where we had police officers sitting on corners, right? It was inefficient. It caused a lot of overtime. It wasn't necessary, right? By ending that, you can return more to a community policing model and also reduce your overtime and your expenditures related to that. We're doing things like we're cutting overtime. As mentioned, with the police officers just sitting there, it generated a lot of overtime. We're looking at how different departments are spending their overtime and whether it's necessary or excessive, and asking every department to reduce their budgets through overtime and other expenditures up to 10%. We're also aggressively pursuing grant revenue. The city receives, millions of dollars in grants every year, but that doesn't mean that there's not more that we can apply for. The mayor is committed to using our current grant writers to expand what we're seeking currently at the state level and federal level, but also potentially adding additional help there to go after more grant money that the city might be historically missing. And we've located a lot of money through public safety and other departments that they just haven't historically applied for through negligence or knowledge, whatever the reason were. The mayor's been very aggressive about telling all directors to search for that money, pulling that money, because it offsets what you individuals have to pay through your taxes. And then also responsible economic development, all right? As I mentioned before, the city wants to see development. They want to see people building in Jersey City, but it has to be responsible building. It has to be building that offers affordable housing. So it's not just benefiting the few, but benefiting the entire city. So the mayor wants to continue that development, but it has to be responsible. It has to include that affordable component that's going to help everyone here. We also want to attract new businesses, right? Historically, the city has been a blue-collar industrial city. We lost most of our businesses, right? We want to also bring those back, right? To as much as possible, bring back small businesses, bring back manufacturing businesses, make sure we're creating an environment that's conducive to the businesses that we have and would be conducive to new businesses coming into us. And lastly, we want to attract more tourism for revenue purposes, right? Jersey City has always been the shining city on the hill right out to New York City. However, it hasn't gotten the kind of tourism and kind of credibility nationwide as it has recently, right? It has become the restaurant scene. Everyone's staying here. Everyone's, Airbnb or renting here and then going to New York City. We've attracted a lot more tourism and attracted a lot more individuals outside that are now historically staying and utilizing Jersey City for business purposes, for tourism purposes. And it's a revenue source that we can target and capitalize on that won't hurt the residents, right? It's things we can add to the city because we have roughly through traffic about 400,000 to 500,000 visitors per day, right? If we can start targeting those people, it'll increase our revenue, offset the budget without hurting people who live here and make the city their home. And collectively through that process of all those steps, we hope to narrow that gap. So in the future, we're not focusing on one-shot deals. We're not focusing on aid from the state. We can narrow that gap and make sure we have a sustainable budget that we're spending appropriately and that we have the appropriate revenue to cover those expenditures. Last slide. So last but not least, thank you for coming. As I said, a lot of this relies on you, right? We want your feedback to guide our budget, to guide our actions when we take those measures for the budget, to balance it. And getting that feedback is going to be important for us, making sure we provide a city to you that's not only sustainable, but one suited to your needs. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Eric, did Councilman Gilmore leave? Oh, he left. Okay. Sorry. I was going to call him up to speak, but for those who walked in a little bit later, we had Councilman Gilmore here. And then Senator McNett, I just wanted to bring you up if you just want to say a few words, and then we'll go into Q&A.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. This is my second budget community hearing, and to hear it in the room with the mayor, and then also hear it in the room with the community, the message remains the same. It's very transparent, and I commend Mayor Solomon and his team for being so transparent. And we are working hard to get as much aid as we can from the state. So I thank you for being here tonight. Please ask all your questions because he will answer all of your questions. And when you leave here tonight, I ask of one thing. Tell at least 3 of your neighbors about what you heard tonight so that you begin to spread the word about what is happening with our city. Thank you so much.
Do you want to do Q?
Just reestablishing some quick ground rules for our conversation tonight. One, just want to make sure that everybody is respectful of other folks' time. Please write your questions down in advance so that you can read off of your card. Folks will be coming around. We've got Deputy Mayor Dia and Isaac Smith from our team who will be passing the microphone around to you guys. We'll have 1 minute to ask the question, and then the mayor will try to take as many as he can before he has to go to the next function. So we'll start with the first row and then work our way back. Anybody from the first row?
All right, and thank you for our Councilman at Large, Michael Griffin, who just walked in. So thank you, Michael. All righty. Thanks, Mike. We're doing Q&A, but do you want to say a few words here, Jim? We'll give the councilman a chance to say hi. Just do a quick introduction.
Hello, everyone.
Yes.
Good evening. Sorry I'm late, just coming from the school board meeting. Thank you for your prayers. I'm glad you all were able to make it out tonight. This is some great information. We're just going around and being as transparent as we can possibly be. We were left with something that we weren't quite expecting, but we're working through it, and we're gonna do everything we can to make sure our residents are taken care of, that we're still keeping our promises of working for working families, seniors, and low income and moderate families. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilman, and then we'll take questions. So, just raise your hand if you have a question. First row. What's that?
So I do have a question. This is the question that I always ask.
Yep.
So you are asking for money from the state, and you also recommend a physical monitor. So can you explain to everyone here about why you want a physical monitor and what is a physical monitor?
Absolutely, and I'll put a little bit more information on the state aid request, but thank you, Senator. So when we say we want state aid, the program that exists to provide state aid is called transitional aid. And that program, welcome guys, come on in. What that program has a set of rules. So we have to follow the rules. And basically, any city that is part of that program has a fiscal monitor appointed by the state to oversee the finances of the city. And it means that when that fiscal monitor is in place, they basically have to approve pretty much any financial decision we make. So it means if we want to hire a new employee, they have to give us approval. When we have to bid out contracts, they have to give us approval. When we negotiate with our unions and offer them contracts, they give us approval. Obviously, that's a significant set of kind of power, but we approach it in two ways. First is, if we are asking for this significant amount of state support, we don't feel like we can, say, well, we'll create a special set of rules for us, right? Second thing is, we welcome anybody who's part of the solution for us to get our financial house in order. If their fiscal monitor is someone who is, a partner with us, who knows numbers, who's giving us ideas and saying, hey, look, this contract you put out, I actually think if you put it out to bid, you're going to save money. Great, right? That saves the taxpayers money. So we view that as a net positive. So, we obviously understand that sometimes fiscal monitors, there's always a process of ensuring that, saying, hey, look, we were all elected by the people of the city. We have a good sense of the community, what they're asking us for. But we think we'll be able to build a strong relationship and not be afraid of, the fact that the monitor is going to ask us tough questions, because we need to have full transparency with everything that we're doing. But thank you, Senator.
Anybody on the second row here?
We have Chris Lawrence. Yeah.
All right. Mayor, thank you for
Thank you.
holding this meeting, you and your administration. I noticed on here you got the payroll tax. What would you do to enforce that?
Okay, thank you, Chris. That's a great question, and I'll give us some context to something. So when the state cut our school funding massively, right, basically $300 million every year, they gave us a payroll tax to help make up for it. Unfortunately, the payroll tax doesn't make up for, we're lucky if it gets a third of what they cut, but it is still really important for us to enforce it. Now, that money goes to the school district, so it doesn't help with the budget deficit we talk about up here, but it does help with the school's budget, and that all that adds up on your property tax bill, right? As Peter showed you at the start, it's those three agencies that are part of your property tax bill. But what are we going to do? Well, we just passed a law with our help of our Senator McKnight, Senator Mukherjee, and our Assembly people, and that bill is going to allow us to basically audit all of the big corporations and make sure they're paying their fair share. So now we're going to know you're submitting every quarter to the state your payroll. Now we're going to know what that number is. And did you actually appropriately pay your payroll tax based on that number? And we think by doing that audit, we're going to be able to get significantly more revenue in. And then beyond that, and I think this is something I've talked to members of your union about, is making sure that we are, ensuring that on a big development project that, the contractor is paying, that they have to show us when they want their CO that they paid. And that's not just them, it's also their subcontractors. Because what we see is sometimes these guys try to use the subcontractors as a way out of it. So through that two processes, the CO check and the state data, we should be able to really enforce it. Okay, yes.
Thank you, Mayor Solomon.
Yes. Okay.
I don't think I completely understood this, so I just wanted to clarify this. And it's a Debbie Downer question, I apologize. Because, I think a lot of states are going to have incredible volatility in terms of their partnerships with the federal government at this moment in time. So you're also negotiating with Governor Sherrill at a very fraught time in many ways. In the event that the state is not able to support us, even despite their best intentions, I didn't understand this correctly, are you averse to going to the bond markets?
Sure. So just to give context to the question, we obviously had this big gap, right? $255 million. We're asking the state to help us close a huge chunk of it. And then some of the rest we're going to close through looking at cuts, efficiencies, saving, new revenue, all of those possibilities. And what Nirupa is asking is, well, if the state doesn't come in, would you be willing to bond to basically cover that gap? So there's two things. The state actually has a requirement that we produce a balanced budget roughly without bonding. So one is we can't just choose to bond. The state could give us authorization to bond for a portion of the gap. And it did that in 2023 with the city. But we're trying to avoid doing that because that still pushes the problem down the road. We have to pay interest on that bond. So we're hoping for a different solution. One thing we can also talk to the state about is a loan as well. The traditional break program is an aid program, but if the amount of traditional aid we're requesting isn't met, we can also talk to the state of, well, can we work with you on a loan directly from the state that we pay back to the state, which would avoid having to go to the bond market, which obviously affects our credit rating and our interests. Yeah.
I think of the revenue sources I know of talk because I do feel that the payroll tax, if we could try to work out, we could get a better share insofar as the revenue from the property tax. I think in terms of a question, I'd like to see, I've seen it vacillate a little bit. I think I'd like to know, how could it be circa maybe around 40% is close to that each year where we could get that Board of Education portion at least truncated or lessened a little bit. I think that's the best thing that we could do. So at least we have sustainability and a municipal share of the property tax revenue. So what exactly is looking to be done in that regard?
So thank you, Lawrence. It's similar to the question that Chris asked, but understood. Obviously, the payroll tax collection is really important for us to ensure that our schools are getting the funding that they're entitled to, because it does ultimately help all the taxpayers. So we are issuing these audits now where we have data coming from the state that tells us how much each company should pay and what they owe. And if they're not paying it, then we're going to be able to basically hold them accountable. So we're going to have a whole new office to do that. So thank you.
Oh, hi, thank you. Laura Katzev. Could you say a bit about how City Hall is working with the school board, what the relationships are like now? I'm encouraged to hear that the City Hall is raising money for the school board. It seems like from the point of view of, Jersey City residents, people care a lot about the schools. So
Absolutely.
if you could talk about that.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's funny. The person holding the mic is our deputy mayor for education. So in some ways she should be answering the question, but I'll give a quick answer. Obviously, so just again, for make sure everyone's on the same page, the schools are a separate government entity. So, in some cities, the mayor, appoints the school board members and can really dictate what happens. That's not the case here. They have an elected board, 9 members. You vote for them each year. They set their own budget. They set their own priorities. So we don't have any formal control. But for me, what's really important is I think obviously our schools are the most important part of our community. I have young children. They're in our public schools. It's really important that we have strong, thoughtful, well-governed public schools. So first, as mayor, you get 2 deputy mayors. I thought it was really important to have a deputy mayor focused on education and youth and children. And then Dr. Bryant has an extraordinary biography, extraordinary skills that she's bringing to the job and the position. But we're really asking her to sort of tell us and lead with us is what can the city do to improve educational outcomes for kids? Some of it involves directly working with the schools, but some of it involves projects and priorities outside of the direct public schools. So that's the first piece. Second piece is we are committed to working with the superintendent and the board. So Dr. Bryant is in regular communication with the superintendent and the board. Any issues they have with the city, we work on. So our BA and Dr. Bryant have been working with them on payroll tax information, getting them what they need to set their budget. So we want to be as collaborative as we can, where are ways we can share revenue, things of that nature. And I always say this, I also don't view it my job as just to say yes. I don't want to be antagonistic for no reason. But we also are going to sort of look through, they just released their budget. We haven't had a chance to do the deep dive on it yet, preliminary budget, I should say. But we are going to take a look and say, do we think this budget demonstrate a well-governed approach to our schools? Are our schools doing enough to increase educational achievement of our youth? Those are things we're going to look at. And so it's not as if that we won't have criticisms if we think they're merited. Hope it gives you a sense. Yes. Yeah, Reverend McKinney, right there.
Yes. Thank you very much. I understand budgeting a little bit, where I was a regional manager in McDonald's. And I like where I seen the budget was showing where he was trying to trim some fat. But my problem that I have is, why is it that when a new administration comes in, some of this stuff should have been caught with the council people before all of this? So could you elaborate on that for us, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Reverend. And it's a phenomenal question, and it's a really important one. So I always say 2 things. I was obviously on the council, and I think I have a strong record on this, but you always think what else you could have done. I did vote against every budget all 8 years on the council. And when I voted against it, I would say, I think we're using these gimmicks. And some of these gimmicks were just known, right? If you just looked at the budget, you knew. So during our budget hearing in September, I said, you're selling land, $33 million in the budget. Well, what's the plan for next year? And no one could answer. So you don't have a plan to fill that gap next year. But unfortunately, my other colleagues didn't, Councilman Gilmore, I should say, voted against it all 4 years too. But none of the other colleagues on the council at the time, voted against it. But with that said, I still walked in and thought I was going to walk into a deficit between 100 and 150 million. I didn't think it was going to be 250. And that was primarily because of the healthcare issue. We did not know, and we believe that the healthcare costs were pretty systemically under budgeted, systemically hidden from the council into how expensive they would be. So, we have basically $52 million in unpaid, unbudgeted health bills from 2024 and 25, and then an additional $48 million in expected costs this year. That was the biggest piece that was just unknown. So, I think as everybody should have aware there was a problem, but the size and the scope, we didn't know until we started peeling back the onion.
Then a budget audit. What happened to that?
So that's a good question. So we are legally required to do an audit of the city's budget every year. And those are public on our city website. The audit identified many of the issues we talked about, but not all of them. You can read the past audits, but one of the promises I have made is we released that audit will be done in the summer covering 2025. When that audit is public, we will host a meeting about it. We won't just stick it on our website and not tell anybody. We'll host a meeting and we'll go through what the auditor found. And obviously this will be the prior administration, but I've directed our finance director to already start going through and coming up with plans to fix every issue that's been identified in the audit.
My last question is that I would like to see the litter patrol, as far as like in the city, we have a litter patrol. Now, when I was running my markets in New York, my company, which was McDonald's, I had a $25 million year budget. We were responsible as business owners for every piece of paper that we put on the ground. Yeah. At 12 o'clock, the litter patrol would come by. If there was any litter in front of my stores, We
You
got
get a ticket.
summer's ticket and we had to pay. So see, this is something that you need to look at.
Mhm.
Also, we need to get these health inspectors in these restaurants
Mhm.
because they're selling food that's been set up for hours and hours and hours. So there is ways that we can get some
Yeah.
untapped
revenue.
resources. Okay, thank you.
No, thank you, Reverend, and absolutely. So one of our things is, way to increase revenue is to increase our enforcement. But we don't just want to ticket people for no reason. It's enforcement to change behavior to make the city more livable. So trash, traffic enforcement, landlords that are abusing tenants and not conditions. Those are all groups that we will go after and increase enforcement to get more revenue. Yes.
I have a community question about,
Yes.
I have a concern. Is there approval that must be provided when a new proprietor comes into the community? A prime example is all of these smoke shops. Are those approved? Or you can just put up whatever you want because there's too many smoke shops on MLK.
Yeah,
And
I hear you.
he spoke about what I wanted to say about the litter.
Yep.
You want to generate currency for Jersey City. There's a lot of money that we can get. Tickets,
Mhm.
people parking in my handicap spot,
Mhm.
the high fire hydrants. And you call the police, they don't come. And when they do come, the person already moved.
Yep. I hear you.
So there's money that the city can
100%.
generate.
Agreed. So just briefly on the smoke shops. So we actually passed a law a couple of years ago. It does require them to register. It doesn't mean that they're not they can't open because if it's allowed by the zoning. But we also did set up for new smoke shops. We did set up a distance between the smoke shops that they can be. So what we can do is we can make sure our inspectors go out and make sure that all the smoke shops across the whole city have both registered first, and then second that they're following the distance rules. Now we can't change it for the shops that's set up before we pass the ordinance, right? So if they were open and running and they're next to each other before we pass the ordinance, we can't do anything about that. But going forward, we can keep them separate. I forget the exact distance, but they have to be a certain distance from each other. Yeah.
Hey, thank you. Hey, Mayor.
Hey, Deborah.
So just, on the revenue side of your ledger, well, two things. When you were talking about the fiscal monitor, what we had done for a long time here, which almost to a fault, is when we go out for RFP, what we do is take the lowest bidder. That's not always providing the best services. And I know you're committed to the latter, right?
Mhm.
Best services. So I'm not sure if something could be done with that or if your hands are going to be tied with that. And it's not even a question. I'm just going to share a
sure,
couple
of
of
course.
thoughts, couple more thoughts. So you want your economic, engines to be operating on all cylinders. So for example, that we've done a project here to revitalize MLK, right? It seems to be stalled to the extent that, and that's another opportunity maybe for funding, because this was a climate justice, and I know that you're also committed to having the city be climate change ready, right? The resiliency factor is on your mind a lot. You've spoken about it. So there's funding related to that. And when you start talking about infrastructure and economic development, and, we're only as strong as our weakest link, if all of the economic centers of the city are not operating on all cylinders, I'm just wondering how the economic development mechanism within the city, whether it's the Economic Development Corporation or working with the state. I've had some conversations with Bill O'Day about, and I know that the senator's familiar with neighborhood revitalization tax credits. There's a lot that can be done economically to revitalize this business district, to bring it up, and to also have it be climate change ready, because there's funding for that. And one last thing, just in terms of fees, more revenue, what came up in some of the focus groups when we put that plan together here is the fact that there are so many businesses that, so many storefronts that are vacant. There are other models in other cities, and some people call it a vacancy tax. It's not always called that. But You know, I remember that in working with Michelle Massey, one of the things, and she was really, really passionate about this, is having it be that these commercial storefronts were made more affordable. They're just out of
Yeah.
reach, or the doors are
Agreed.
closed.
Yes. Thank you, Deborah. So let me just touch each of those quickly. On the bids piece, I very much hear what you're saying. Construction bids, we have to take the lowest bidder based on a state law. But for other projects, we can do a RFP and make sure we're considering all of the factors, which most important is the quality of the work, right? You know, you pay 2% more, but you get better quality, then it's a good deal versus vice versa. So we will do that. On economic development, very important for us. Sometimes doesn't directly impact the budget because we don't get like sales tax revenue or payroll tax goes to the schools, but important for the future health of the city, important for our long-term property values, all of those things. We are going to task the JCEDC and the JCRA, we haven't figured out exactly which agency, to really actively recruit bigger businesses to come back to the waterfront, working with the state EDA. And then we're going to have the EDC focus on small businesses and make sure that if you have a small business that you're starting or you have it already open, you know, the government can be this sort of black hole. You need a permit. Well, who do I talk to? How do I get it? And we want to make sure that that process is smooth and easy. We've heard from so many small businesses that it took them months to get a permit and they just, you know, sat vacant. That's not good for any of us. So we're very committed to that. And then your last thing was on storefronts. Yes, vacancy 100%. It's been brought up in other meetings. So we are going to come up with our plan for how we can both try to incentivize vacant land to be developed and certainly maintained. We can obviously issue summons if it's not maintained. And then for the storefronts to work on a program to encourage businesses to move in and potentially use our UEZ funds to provide a grant to help with the initial cost of getting it set up. Yeah. I think I have to keep going and then I'll go back to you just because we got to get everyone before I got to leave.
I have a concern question. A couple of days ago, I read in the paper that there was, they shut down 5 smoke shops. So when you shut them down and the DEA is involved in all that, why are they opening back up the next day?
So it's a good question. We've asked our police. And
Yeah,
our,
I don't get it.
Well,
I don't get
so
it.
two of the so it's a good question. So the JC Police and Public Safety, working with the DEA, did raid 5 smoke shops. Obviously, we always have to follow the law. 2 of the 5 were supposed to be shut down. The other 3, for the different violations that they were being accused of or are being accused of, were allowed to reopen. And that, again, that's based on the law. But 2 of them, I believe, did reopen. So we're talking to both our public safety and our prosecutor's office to say, look, if that seems like they're violating what was ordered, they should be back out issuing a summons. So we will make sure that our teams are doing that follow-up to enforce the law. If they're supposed to be shut down, they're supposed to be shut down. Yeah, we got a couple more, but here, yeah, get Ravi and then in the back, and then we got 2 young men over there and Erica. Yeah,
Yeah, thanks, Mayor.
we'll get you both. Go ahead.
Okay, from the last slide from the balanced budget,
Yeah.
there is a line item called debit services. What exactly does that mean?
So which service?
Debit service.
Oh, debt service. So debt service that is what we pay for anything the city's ever bonded for. So when we build a big building, we don't just pay our operating costs. We issue a big bond for it, and then we have to pay that bond back over 30 years or 50 years or however long the bond is. So the debt service is, you add up all of the payments we have to make for our bonds, it's $79 million next year. Yes.
Right here.
Yeah, and then we have more.
So my name is Tyson Williams, and I am a resident of this community. And every day, this neighborhood, like, it's not dirty, but like it's like you see trash everywhere. I'm nervous. I'm sorry. I'm nervous.
You're all good.
It's
You're
very
doing great.
dirty, and we walk past it, and people just ignore it, and like it's an issue. And me and my group was able to get 162 people to sign our petition about garbage for a cleaner community. And I have a few questions for you, like 3 questions, and I just want you to answer them. So my first question is, how do you feel about not enough garbage cans being in Jersey City?
Sure. First of all, thank you for being active, for fighting to make your community better, and completely agree that trash across the city is a major problem. So first thing is, you're right, we need better trash cans, more public trash cans out. But the second thing we need to do connected to them is we got to make sure our trash vendor is picking them up. Because what happens oftentimes is, we have the trash can out there, but if it doesn't get cleaned 2 times a day, it becomes its own source of trash. So we're going to hold our vendor accountable. And if they don't do a good job, we can actually bring that in-house and do it ourselves.
Okay. And my second question for you is, yes, as a community, what can we do to make the community a better place with the garbage?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great. So first of all, we would love to work with you. So I'll make sure our team gets your contact information before we go. But we're organizing neighborhood cleanups all the time. Councilman Gilmore is organizing with Erica, organizing neighborhood cleanups all the time. So we want to help you do that. We can provide the resources, the garbage bags, the pickers, get DPW to pick it up afterward. And then more broadly, we're trying to come up with a whole plan to reduce trash in the community. We're holding our trash vendor accountable for their work, making sure that we have more neighborhood cleanups, increasing our litter patrol that the city runs. So all of those are things that we're trying to do to clean up the trash. Yes, that's the last one, I think, right?
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, hold on. I'm sorry. The last one is, what is being done to prevent overflowing bins and improve pickup frequency?
Yeah, I'll give you the short one is we just got to hold our trash vendor accountable for delivering on what they're supposed to do. And so we're working on doing that. But thank you so much.
Cool, you're going to continue. Hi,
Yeah.
I will try to keep it short because I am definitely long-winded. I'm a resident and a small business owner. And I love what you were saying, but my main, I guess, worry or curiosity is kind of like the how of it all. And I know you guys are probably doing all of that, but I'm hoping that there's going to be at least some kind of restructure of your website, and a full kind of restructure of how the city is kind of, I don't know, presented or explained to people. Because the city used to be 4 different cities in one, I know it's very overwhelming for people to kind of take in. So if you haven't been here for a long time, it is hard. And I also just want to try to make it, I know a lot of people know this, but downtown is not the only area of Jersey City. So I just want to really make sure we're trying to spread that out, because that has been the last 12 years, their only focus.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you. Yeah,
that's all.
thank you for that. No, of course, I thank you. So our communications director is actively working to revamp the city website, as well as just a broader way we talk about the city. I can promise you there's going to be no Make It Yours campaign. That's not a campaign about the people of the city. It's about people not from the city. But instead, it's going to be about focused on every neighborhood. And we are actively working to make sure that our cultural events are spread throughout the whole city and not just in downtown. Thank you. Yes. Well, let's do Erica and Sharon, and then that's it. So the last 2. And then we'll get you, ma'am, too. Isaac, one more over there, too. But we'll be quick because I got to run in a second.
All right. Thank you so much for this time. And thank you so much for the transparency. In addition to opening the finance books, are we opening up the HR books? Were there any whistleblowers over the years? Have you identified any specific handlers responsible for this gap? Is there an investigation, and how are we weeding out the bad actors? Was all of this legal? Is there anyone we can sue for pain and suffering?
Thank you, Erica. I appreciate the question. So a couple things. One is we have legal limits on what we can open about HR, right? HR is personnel files. Those personnel files are confidential for good reason, right? So we can't open up those up. But what I would say is this: it was very important for me to get a new finance director in for the city to make sure that we had just a new finance team. Start there, and make sure that we're doing that. The second thing is our report that we released was we thought our administration's explanation to the community of how we got here. However, we're focused now on solutions, so I'm not devoting time and staff resources to investigations. But what we say is we welcome any investigation. The state comptroller has a mission to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. If the state comptroller wants to launch an investigation, we welcome it. We'll cooperate with it. We'll open up everything because we agree that everyone should look at every part of how we got into this mess. So, thank you. Alrighty. And then I know, ma'am, and then Sharon, and then we got to probably run. Yes.
I'm good.
Are you sure? All right. We got Dia. Can you do Sharon, and then we have the man in the back, and then the promise the last 2. Oh, you have one, ma'am? Oh, so go ahead. I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah.
And it's very clear about our homeowners still on homes on the block. Most stuff is from outsiders, or they're not taking care of their property.
Yeah.
Period. for people not cleaning up around their house. Putting garbage on the sidewalk and leaving it there for 2 or 3 days, sometimes weeks. I have a neighbor here that her husband have to clean up behind them with the other homeowners. Now, what can be done for these homeowners that renting to these people?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're gonna rent, you put it, put it in their lease that they have to take out the garbage twice a week and clean up around. I go outside and I sweep. My husband goes outside and sweeps, and I think it's unfair.
Absolutely.
So what y'all need to do, when I call, they say they're gonna send inspectors,
Yeah.
and they do not send the
Inspectors.
Or if they come, they get paid under the table.
I hear you. So, ma'am, thank you for sharing 100%, right? And you deserve to live in a clean neighborhood. You certainly deserve a landlord. If you purchase a property, it's your responsibility to maintain it, right? And there's no excuses for that, right? That's the standard we hold everyone to. So we just working with our business administrator, we took a step recently. The sanitation department had its inspectors removed about 4 or 5 years ago, and they're put into a broad code compliance division. We think that led to a lack of real enforcement of sanitation issues in the city. So we are actually bringing them back now. We've started that process. So we will have dedicated sanitation inspectors whose only job will be is to focus on sanitation issues. And that's both to my friend's question over here, the issues related to trash in the city, but also to your, like the trash vendor, but also to issuing summonses for landlords who don't maintain their properties and don't maintain the trash. So we'll be seeing that. We'll also just get your contact information before we go, and we'll work with Councilman Gilmore and his office just to make sure we get extra resources over to Wegman Parkway. Okay, good. Yeah, good. Yes.
So we have to do our last 2 questions.
Yes, and I do apologize, but yes, go ahead. I got you. Yeah, go ahead.
How you doing?
I hear you, man. We'll get it taken care of.
My name is Courtney Evans, and I'm a father of 5, and I want to know what I could do because I have an open CPS case, and I have a lot going on, so I feel like people in the system is abusing it.
So when you said TPS?
DCF.
DCF. Okay, I got you. So what we'll do is we'll get your contact information and then we will connect you. Oftentimes that's going to be at the state level, but we'll make sure we get the right person to basically guide you through that and all the information that you need and be able to help guide you through that process. Thank you. Yep. Yep.
Thank you. I think that these meetings are helpful, and I think that the tone has already shifted. So I appreciate you looking at the macro and the micro, zoomed in and zoomed out approach to affordability and also growth. Whether that's, the mom and pop shops and, the garbage, the whole picture. Thank you. 2 questions for you that I have tonight are, do we know when the city will find out about the state relief? That's one question. The other question I had is about the pilots. So I understand some of the pilots are coming due or coming up. People say different. It seems like abatements have a bad sort of stigma around them, that term, but then pilots have a more positive or I would like personally as a community organization leader to understand more about that. And I'm also wondering if there's a way that you might, there's a question in this moment, but then also maybe offer some sort of city led workshop or learning webinar or something.
Absolutely.
So that the mass public can learn more about pilots, abatements, and what the pros and cons are.
Absolutely. So just briefly on the state aid question, the latest we'll know is June 30th, because that's when the state has to pass their budget. We're hoping we get clear guidance in advance of that. But so certainly in the months ahead, April, May, would like to have some guidance, but we might have to wait until June 30th until we know. And then on the pilots, we're happy to do a public workshop and work with our financial teams on that. Just very briefly on the pilots. First, the promise I made is no pilots for luxury only housing. That was given out too frequently. The Pompidou is an example of that. We can't do that. Pilots can be an important tool for the city to provide affordable homes. in infrastructure, but you have to do two things. The first is you got to make sure you're sharing some of that money with the schools, so you're not underfunding the schools. And the second thing is you got to hold the developers accountable. And that's why I never took money from developers, so that when I'm looking at a project, I can evaluate it just on the merits, right? And developers have so much money and they pour so much into the political system, they're used to just getting whatever they ask for. And instead, you've got to say, no, you want this, but we're only going to do it if you give us $10 million more and more affordable homes, that type of negotiation. So, and awesome. So let me just do two things. I got to run. I apologize. I normally like to stay after these things, but something got added to my calendar right now. So that's why I have to run out as opposed to being able to stay and talk to everybody. I do apologize for that. I do want to just invite up Councilman Gilmore just to end up the meeting because he wasn't here when we were doing the addresses. But Councilman, if you just want to come briefly up and address the crowd, and then I apologize. I'm going to run out, but thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
That's it, brother.
Yes. So good afternoon, everyone. Councilman Gilmore. I do want to take this time just to, thank the administration for one, being transparent as we navigate this, Lord Jesus, this financial crisis. I'm going to be completely honest, there's going to be rough decisions ahead. But I think that when you're transparent and you involve people in the process that's going to affect them the most, I think that's the best way to do business. But as always, you have a voice in me to represent the interests of the community and our concerns. So I will make sure I stay true to that pledge and continue to advocate for and with the residents of Jersey City, namely Ward F.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm going to pull up the QR code on my way out. If there were questions or ideas that you had that you didn't get to ask, we want to hear your feedback. But thank you again for being a part of this. We really appreciate it. We also have food, coffee.